Over the years, I've talked to a lot of dairy department managers, and it's interesting, a lot of the quotes I get back from them when we talk about reinventing dairy or growing dairy, I often hear things like, dairy is dairy, not much has changed in the past 30 years, not sure what we can do about it. We use dairy to draw shoppers through the store, that hasn't really changed, and why try to fix something if it's not broken? Those are common comments that we get from dairy department managers. And we're going to share with you today some really important facts about the department and again, how we can capture some growth. Historically, it has been one of the, I would say, the last departments that retailers think of when we start talking about reinventing stores or remodeling stores. All the focus in dairy has really been about operations, right? We've got labor issues. We have out-of-code issues with freshness dating. We have stocking, things we got to deal with, in-stock positions, in other areas, just trying to maintain a clean dairy case. So that's been a lot of the focus. And again, we're going to talk to you about some real big opportunities where we see where we can capture some of that growth and get beyond some of the space constraints and some of the issues that we're dealing with today. As we think about growth, it's tough to come by. If you look at the numbers in our industry in grocery today, we're probably flat in terms of sales, and we're probably down 4 or 5% on a unit basis, or real growth. So there's some challenging times. And if you think about how retailers have tried to capture growth in the past, we put in club departments, club aisles in some of our stores, if you guys remember that. And after a certain time, we had to pull them out. Didn't really help us. We put in dollar-only sections in our stores, trying to capture the excitement of the growth of dollar-only products. We eventually took those out as well. We've seen some recent movement around leasing departments like Toys R Us or computer supplies. They eventually were pulled from our stores. And more recently, how many people have been in the supermarket and see lawn furniture at the front of the store, right? Well, those are starting to come out of the stores as well. So we've tried to capture growth in a lot of new areas, and the reality is we just haven't been able to do that. If you think about the opportunity for dairy, it is tremendous. And again, we're going to share some numbers with you. There are core departments in our store that if we really focus on those, we're going to get a lot more out. And there's some eye-opening data that we'll share with you. Our organization has optimized about 250 stores this year for supermarkets. And almost in every single case, we've recommended to grow dairy. And we'll share some of those numbers with you. If you think about dairy, it's probably one of the smallest departments in our store. It has some of the highest traffic, highest turns. It's one of our most profitable departments. And even after we pay for equipment, utilities, and all the things that sort of hold us back from expanding the department, even when we pay for all those things, it's a pretty powerful department. So it's one that we think has got a lot of opportunities, and we'll show you what that looks like.
The section that I'll be talking a little bit about today is really the reasons for reinvention. And when we talk about the reasons, we're really going to talk about the strategic reasons. Paul's section is going to highlight more of the economic reasons relative to the benefit of actually doing these reinvention practices. But I thought before we actually jumped into some of the reasons for reinvention, it would be helpful to just understand a little bit about the process that the coalition has gone through in creating these design principles and documented proven best practices. And really it includes 4 major focus areas. As you can see on the slide, it starts with leveraging shopper insights, and that is so that we can identify both opportunities and barriers when shopping the dairy case. The second, in clockwise fashion, is improving that shopping experience so that the department better serves the needs of today's shopper. I think Paul alluded to the fact that not a lot has changed in the dairy case. Well, we can't say the same thing about today's shopper. Thirdly is optimizing the space opportunities. And again, Paul's probably going to talk at more length about that, but that is simply to ensure that we align how we merchandise the dairy department with prevailing shopping patterns, which, like the shopper today, are changing. We'll talk a little bit about that in my section. And then lastly, but not least, enhancing the shopper perceptions. What we'll share with you during this first section will make it extremely clear just how important this is in order to increase the shopper engagement and make the department a more inviting place that will encourage them to spend not only more time, but more of their dollars in the department. I think also it's important to step back and recognize the massive amount of research and testing that has gone into everything that we're talking about today. Starting in about 2006, Dairy Management Inc., sometimes referred to as DMI, in collaboration with Kraft Foods and the Dannon Company, formed a coalition approach to look at these issues from an industry perspective with a simple aim of driving incremental sales opportunities throughout the dairy department. As you can see, the scope of work is impressive, to say the least. Since that time of 2006, this coalition has analyzed over 340,000 shopping trip transactions, and we'll touch on that a little bit today. We've audited the layout and conditions of nearly 22,000 retail grocery stores across the country. We've interviewed and surveyed shoppers relative to their attitudes, both in and outside of the store. And lastly, and probably most importantly, have tested either category or department level reinventions in probably 1,000 or more stores across the country. And again, both Paul and Scott will talk at more length about that. So the point here is, beyond the normal research and initiatives of these organizations, these are all incremental on top of that, and really point to just the massive knowledge and work that has been undertaken since the coalition was first conceived in 2006. So I think if we kind of set the stage, we're going to make some comparisons with some of these perimeter departments, because it's really no surprise that when you walk into most supermarkets today, and again, Paul alluded to this briefly in his introductory remarks, clearly retailers have been investing in what we call the perimeter departments. You can see up here produce, floral, deli, bakery. And they've been doing that as competition has intensified for the shopper dollar. And they've invested in these categories under the belief that this is where competitive differentiation exists. This is what's going to enable them to compel the shopper to visit their store, not others. And the consequence of that is very clear when you talk to shoppers about their perceptions of departments like these, produce for instance. You hear terms like modern, fresh, and stimulating. Very positive associations that would encourage any retailer or merchandiser that they have a very strong ability to grow the base business. I think when we look at the dairy, unfortunately, on the other hand, the dairy really hasn't kept up with the times, or even with the Joneses for that matter. And Paul again alluded to many of the reasons for that from the operator's perspective. But I think in some cases we can say the dairy has been treated more like a category as opposed to a fresh foods department. And in many cases, a center store category at least. Now that's somewhat troubling when you look at the consequences of that behavior, all unintended obviously, is that we've learned through the research that shoppers don't feel as though they have a strong emotional connection to the department. Well, if you look at the slide, it's probably clear there's not a lot of visual cues in merchandising that really embraces and warms the consumer up to shopping that. Additionally, shoppers indicate that it's difficult to find products when you have a linear running department, not well demarcated with clear section breaks or bump outs calling out specific areas of the store. And I think more importantly, when you listen to the customers and listen to the words that they associate with dairy as opposed to produce, remember produce, fresh, modern, stimulating, dairy has stale, old, boring. Pretty contrast, a very distinct contrast in opinions and perceptions between the two. So if we're really trying to build the business, we really have to start by changing those perceptions. Now, this is a rendering of a dairy aisle of the future from the coalition. It is a rendering, it is not the vision, but as you can see, distinctly different from what we saw on the previous page and more similar to what we've seen in the perimeter departments. You know, key points of that is it now brings together the department in one location versus sometimes separating into distinct areas. It now dimensionalizes it rather than creates a linear flow. It obviously creates a more enjoyable shopping experience by not only making it more open, but by creating points of interruption where consumers can find information about distinct products. The groups and flow of the department is significantly different than what we've seen. So I think the point is, this is not simply a theoretical design, but more importantly, a proven principle that the coalition has demonstrated can result in stronger sales for the retailer, as well as stronger perceptions and more positive consumer feedback. And again, without stealing the thunder of Paul and Scott, I just wanted to share that briefly with you. Now, as far as some of the strategic reasons for why dairy deserves to be reinvented, if we have to make the argument, whether we're the industry or whether we're a merchandiser within a retail organization, I think first point is the simple fact that if we look at the dairy department in a disaggregated fashion, the fact of the matter is dairy drives first more shoppers to our stores and drives those shoppers to our stores more frequently. And we can say that based on the evidence on the chart. If we looked at the top dairy category, fluid milk, versus the top produce category, bananas, we can see that fluid milk has a much higher household penetration. And within that household penetration, we also can see the occasions by which those households buy fluid milk is 10% higher than bananas. Now, if we extended that comparison to the second and third categories in both of the respective departments, we would see similar trends occurring there. So the point is, if we've invested in produce and we've done a good job in produce, we should really turn our attention to the dairy department, as the dairy department really offers a lot of headroom relative to improvement opportunity. And I say headroom because while we have 91% of the households purchasing milk from a grocery store, the fact of the matter is, if we look at all channels, there's 5 percentage points not purchasing from our stores. So if we invest in dairy, we do a better job connecting with the shopper, we have a better chance of recapturing that 5% that isn't shopping our store today. The second reason why we want to reinvent the dairy department is that dairy is a vital component in protecting, if not growing, our Quick Trip business. Now, you may ask, why the Quick Trip business? 2 reasons. One, nearly half of all trips to a grocery store today, 48% in fact, are considered quick trips. Quick trips are purchases that have between 1 and 5 items, generally a monetary value of less than $40. 2, grocery as a channel has been losing share of quick trip primarily to 2 other channels, that is drug and mass. So when we look at quick trip, we can see the prevalence of dairy and its role that it plays within the quick trip, and that is 40% of all quick trips to a grocery store today have at least 1 dairy item in it. And more importantly, when we look at the chart to the right, when dairy is present in that basket, consumers are spending 10% more. The point is, leveraging dairy is an incredibly important aspect for grocery retailers in particular to defend against the quick trips, especially as we start to see further encroachment and new store development from those other channels. Another reason why we look at dairy reinvention today is clearly health and wellness is a growing and continually strong trend, whether it's because of the prevalence of obesity in the U.S., the aging population, or the escalation of healthcare costs. There's no denying it. Consumers are more concerned and aware of health and wellness issues. Now, how is the dairy industry responding in general? Well, you can see an explosion of new products that had health-related claims over the recent years. And you can see not only the absolute number of new products brought to market since 2004 to 2008, you can see the annual growth rate of those products. So the dairy industry has really responded in providing products that probably were already aligned very well with health and wellness and extending beyond that and building on that capability. So the point is elevating the communications to the consumer about the role that dairy plays in health and wellness can only help but strengthen the retailer's health and wellness overall proposition. Separate from the new products that we were talking about just a second ago relative to the claims, we already can see that dairy and health and wellness are very intertwined within the shopper's mind. As part of a broader path to purchase study, consumers completed various journal exercises, and this collage is just a representation of those exercises. But if you look at that, what you can see is that several perceptual themes come out, and it's clearly health. We have health. If you look at good for food, healthy, strong are words that are describing that. We have fitness, get fit. We have illustrations of people exercising. We also have the relationship and association to the family, primarily the mom and the children as the gatekeeper of health and wellness. So the quote clearly reinforces what we've already heard before, but also reinforces the role that dairy plays in our everyday life, as well as the role it can play in health and wellness. You know, we come back to the new products, and again, it's a simple fact, but probably a fact that's often overlooked, and that is dairy has had a figurative tsunami of new products released into the market, of which we already saw the range of new products that health-related claims. But the fact of the matter is, dairy as a department is far outpacing other departments like produce or even food and beverage on a relative basis in terms of new products coming out. So the practical challenge that retailers face today is, where do we put all these new products? Now, to further complicate that, and this was work that Paul and his team had done, we had found that the real challenge is not a one-in, one-out case, because in some cases, even the bottom performing dairy products still contribute 14 times more profitability to the store as compared to other departments' low performing products. So the key there is, how do we find more space, incremental space, so that we can build the base business and bring in new variety that is accretive to the base business and is also good for the store. You can see on the right-hand side, between 2004 and 2008, we've had about a 65% increase in the number of absolute new products coming out. Now, these new products, as I just mentioned, have a significantly higher value as compared to what we see in other areas. So really, the point of this is that dairy today needs to be reinvented, space needs to be readjusted and reevaluated so that we can make room not only for those new products, but make room for those new sections that highlight those functional health and wellness related products. And really the last rationale that I'll touch on that's going to then lead into Paul's section really is the simple fact that if we look at a return on dollars invested, dairy is extremely productive in its use of its square footage in the store. In fact, if you look at this chart, dairy provides over 2.5 times more return on its space on a true profit basis as compared to produce. And to be clear, and Paul can elaborate further on it, the true profit is net of all activity-based cost, overhead, distribution costs, and warehousing costs. So this is a true cost associated with selling these products. So if we look at a rationale for expanding the department and see a figure or a metric like this, it's really easy to justify why dairy should deserve more space, because after all, if one department deserves more space, why wouldn't it be the one that's already returning the strongest ROI per square footage? So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, who will talk more about what are the benefits to the retailers for reinventing the department. Paul?
Thank you, David. If you just saw that last chart that David showed, pretty powerful numbers. One of the things that we constantly hear from retailers when we talk about expanding the dairy case is, well, I've got CapEx budget issues. It costs a lot to put a dairy case in. We've got equipment, we've got utility costs, we've got maintenance costs for compressors. We have operating expenses to deal with, right? Utilities, everyone's been talking about that. We have labor budgets. I'll never forget, it was about a year ago, I came back from a major national supermarket chain here in the US, and I had the head dairy manager telling me he was really concerned about the yogurt category. And I said, well, why is that? He goes, well, I got to stock it 3 times a day. I don't have enough labor in my store. And I asked him, I said, well, how many cups are you selling a week in your store? He goes, well, we sell about 4,000 cups a week. I said, well, what's the problem? Wouldn't you love to have 4,000 units for one category throughout the rest of the store? Well, the reality was he was so landlocked in the space that he had, and he could not get CapEx budget to expand and remodel stores or new stores. And it was really frustrating to him. So instead of talking about how great the yogurt category was, he was fixated on the fact that his people have to go to the shelf 3 times a day to stock it. So that's where we are. That's where we are with dairy. And again, we're going to show you some numbers here that are very eye-opening. There's also inventory concerns on code date sensitive product. If we start to expand the case, are we going to run into code date issues and shrink? And those are some of the pushbacks we get. And then obviously space in the stores that are challenging for us to try and capture. So that's really what's holding us back in this department. And so because of that, we're trying other things like the toys and lease departments and dollar-only sections and club pack sections and lawn furniture and all the things I talked about earlier. We're trying to get growth through there, but after we try it 6 months, 8 months, after it goes through a few prototypes, we end up pulling it out of our stores. So we're going to show some real numbers here in a second about what it's worth to really get after the dairy case and do a job of growing it, expanding it, and then Scott will talk about reinvention and what that will look like. If you looked at the numbers, again, David's slide talked about true profit. We do a lot of work with retailers to help them understand the economics of their stores. And so you'll see some references on the bottom of these slides, if you can read it, something called the Super Study. Well, the data you're going to see on the next several slides come from Kroger, Safeway, Super Value Albertsons, and one of the Ahold divisions. So 4 of our biggest chains, grocery chains here in the United States, the data is coming out of that. And it's pretty eye-opening. If you look across these departments, the first column that's up there, that's the percent of SKUs selling less than 1 unit per store per week. So if you think of all the items we have in our stores, and we've densed up with higher shelves, we put a lot of variety in our stores, look at the numbers. Look at the bottom one, HBC, health and beauty care, right? All of our beauty aids, cosmetics, shampoos and conditioners, 81% of the SKUs sell less than 1 unit in each store every week. Right? Our stores are sitting on about $1 million in capital today, just that center store. Take out the service departments, perishables, produce, seafood. Just focus on the packaged goods, including dairy and frozen, what we call center store. We're sitting on about $1 million in inventory tied up in our stores. And retailers are getting real fearful of inflation and what's to come. But look at our numbers. Why aren't we growing dairy? Dairy, only 3% of the items sell less than 1 unit per store per week. It's amazing. I mean, look at all these other departments. General merchandise, 74%. The same departments we were putting computer supplies in and lawn furniture in. Liquor's 44%, florals 44%, seafood's 41%, and there's a whole host of categories that are in the 30% range. That's a lot of items that just aren't turning in our stores. Some of them are unique, and we need to keep them, but there's a lot of non-value-added product out there. And the reason we're not going and getting that space is because we keep hearing the concerns about CapEx and utility costs and those things. But you saw on David's slide, when you factor all those things in, we pay for labor, we pay for inventory, we pay for the compressors and the maintenance, we pay for the depreciation on equipment we put in. We're still making a hell of a lot more money in dairy than almost every other department. Okay? The middle column, days of supply. Look at our days of supply in health and beauty care again, 60 days. You know what we're sitting on in cosmetics today in a large food drug combination store? About 365 days of supply. We're sitting on about a year of inventory. At $7 a pop, adds up to a lot of money. General merchandise, 51 days of supply. We're getting daily deliveries to our stores now. Almost daily deliveries to most of our stores. If not, we're getting 5 deliveries a week. Some of the lower volume stores we're down to 3. But we're sitting on 60 days, 50 days, 30 days. It's pretty amazing. Again, look at dairy, we're at 7 days, and that's an average across all. We know some categories like milk, we're sitting on 1/3 day of supply because we're having to restock it, or my yogurt example. And we're just not giving enough space to the departments that are really turning and really driving our store because we're worried about the cost of running that. But the profit, even when you factor that in, is pretty powerful. To build on the slide, the last slide that Dave showed, we're making all that money in dairy. The third column to the right there, that's the true profit return on inventory invested. So for every dollar we put in the store on that shelf, every dollar of product we have in a store, that's our annual profit that we make after we pay for everything. Pay for the warehouse, pay for transportation, pay for labor at the store, the scanner, the bagger, the store managers, the equipment, the depreciation, the utility costs. We're paying for everything, and this is the returns that we make when we're done. Okay, so that argument about CapEx and that really doesn't fly when you look at the hard numbers. It's hard to do, granted, because you've got to open new stores and you've got to remodel stores, so I understand that. But again, there's some really big numbers there. Look at dairy, $15.71. So for every dollar we put on the shelf, that's how much net profit we make at the end of the day. Take a look at health and beauty care. We're losing 33 cents for every dollar we put on the shelf. We actually lose money in that department. We're losing money in seafood. We're losing money in the bakery department. Okay, on a margin basis, that number can be as high as 80% loss. And we're already at scratch, bake-off type product. We're not even, or we're bake-off product. We're not even doing anything from scratch anymore. Everything's coming in frozen and we just bake it off or just thaw it and sell it. So even though we've taken out most of those costs, we're still struggling. So my point here is dairy is an exceptional category. We get landlocked, obviously, when we build them, because a lot of times they're on the perimeter and we want to use it to draw people through the store. But we've got to do a better job at releasing those constraints so that we not only use it for the benefits of where it should be located, but also gives us some degrees of freedom so we can begin to bring in some of the items that David showed you, because health and wellness will continue, and it's going to go more mainstream than we ever thought. Okay, some other eye-opening numbers. If we took the bottom 100 dairy SKUs in our stores today and looked at how much profit we make, and we include all the trade spending, so all the performance monies, the slotting monies, again, all the monies to drive the performance, we load everything in, we make just as much profit on the bottom 100 dairy SKUs as we do on the bottom 1,500 grocery SKUs, the bottom 1,100 GM SKUs, and the bottom 1,700 health and beauty care SKUs. Okay? So again, there's a lot more unproductive parts of real estate in the rest of the store that we could go after if we weren't constrained. Okay, so what's it worth? What happens if we shift space? This slide, I'll walk you through it. It may be a little bit tricky, but hopefully you'll see the numbers and it'll be clear when I'm done. If we take 24 feet of the most unproductive space away from grocery, GM, and health and beauty care and give it to dairy, that's the value of it. Okay, so if we took 24 feet away from grocery, and I don't mean just taking the worst SKU in this category and the worst SKU in that category, I mean the worst 4 foot of section. So if it's in carbonated soft drinks, or if it's in the pet aisle, or if it's another category, another aisle, we take 4 foot sections out because that's how we typically merchandise. Again, we're not just picking the slow movers around the store, we're talking about large pieces of real estate. If we take out 24 feet from grocery, we lose $9 in sales. If we took out our worst 24 feet in a typical supermarket. If we take out 24 feet of general merchandise products, we lose $114 in gross profit, not sales. Okay, so this is after all the monies are in, trade monies and all that. Okay, so profit. If we take out 24 feet of HBC, we lose $47 in profit in one store, and that's on a weekly basis. If we take 24 feet from any one of those departments and give it to dairy, we're going to make $821 net profit. So after we pay for equipment, maintenance, utilities, load all it in, all the things that are holding us back from growing, we include all that and we net all that out, we make $821 in incremental profit per store per week. And if we roll it up to 125 store division or chain, if it's a small regional chain, we're talking about $5.3 million in incremental profit versus giving up $61,000, $741,000, or $304,000, depending on which of the other departments you pull the space from. Okay? Pretty powerful stuff. Those are the realities of what we get when we move dairy. Okay, so those are the financials. Okay, Scott's going to come up here in a minute and talk about what does it look like and give you some pretty neat concepts of what reinvention would look like. Here's how shoppers are telling us what they're thinking about some of the reinvention work. If you look at the overall experience, interviewing shoppers in sort of before the renovation work happens and then after, we improve the overall experience of the dairy department, so their perception of dairy went up by 5%. Their view on the appearance of the department went up by almost 5%. Shoppability went up by 3%. They thought it was easier to shop. Things were more clear, easier to find. Modern feel, look at that number, 12%. That's the biggest issue we have. And remember my quotes early on where people say, dairy is dairy, there's not much I can change. Well, there's a lot we can change. Okay, that was the biggest jump we had, that the shoppers were telling us, boy, it looks more modern. You've done something really nice here. Because we really haven't done it in a long time. And then 8% on approachability. And that just means that you're able to get into the department and see what you want. The last couple of slides I have talks about, if we think about word association, again, sort of before and after, how well did we do when we began to reinvent some of the categories and departments within the store. Here's what our shoppers told us. Again, more organized. They felt the store was cleaner, or at least the department was cleaner. They thought the department was more well-stocked, so the dairy case had better in-stock positions. Look at the negative comments. They almost all went away. It went from 26% of shoppers thought the department was crowded to only 4%. No one thought that the department had any odor before because of what they had done to the aisle and completely reinvented the area, including the floors. And 16% thought before that the department category was unorganized. No one thought it was today. So some pretty powerful things. We also looked at results within the category. The last two slides just talk about the cheese category. Penetration went up from 95% to 98%. Already very high. 95 is obviously extremely high, but it also went up to 98. So we improved more traffic within the cheese category. Conversion, 90% of the shoppers that went into the area and looked at cheese made purchases before. 97% made purchases after. Okay, so we even had more buyers. How about time shopped? The average cheese shopper spent 24 seconds before the department was reinvented in the category. Now they spent 56 seconds, almost 2.5 times more. So they were more engaging to the shelf. Even though they told us it was easier to find things, they spent more time because they liked where they were. Again, they were more engaged. And then the things that matter most is the conversion. The average shopper was buying 1.4 cheese items before the department was reinvented. Afterwards, they bought 1.8, so a 30% increase in sales per person. Okay, so those are real good, hard numbers. Not all the reinvention has taken place. Scott's going to show you some examples. Some of it's been done at a category level because we're trying to test different concepts. But the key here is shoppers are telling us they like what they see. The numbers are telling us it means a lot. And we know when we focus on this department because of the foot traffic, the profitability, the fact that we're not sitting there with items that just aren't turning, if we can make even a small adjustment, it pays big dividends. And again, we've tried other parts of the store that really haven't paid off. We have some really big opportunities in dairy. So with that, I'd like to welcome up Scott Dissinger from DMI, who's going to talk again about what the best practices are as we relate to reinvention, as well as some of the concepts. So thank you.
Well, basketball season has started, and if you were a coach and you had Michael Jordan in his prime on your team, what would you do? You basically get out of the way, right? Because it's all about you. Your coaching genius would be proved how you manage time and space. The more touches he gets, the more he's going to score, the more points, you're going to win. It's about space. Everybody else gets out of the way, give him one-on-one, he's going to score. And so that's what we're doing here. It's managing time and it's managing space. More time in the dairy department, improvements in the space. And so what we'll look at is the iterative process that we have gone through. It's taken us about 2 to 3 years looking at a variety of category and department reinventions. There are currently about 10 retail banners across the country, geographically dispersed, who are in some form of total aisle reinvention. And what we are looking at from a strategic goal is creating those connections of making it where the shopper can shop, not search, building the emotional connection where they're thinking about my store versus your shelves, And then thirdly, having a sense of delight versus a sense of dread. So it's shopping, not searching, my store, not your shelves, a sense of delight, not a sense of dread. And we've had terrific results as we've gone through this 2 to 3 year journey, whether it's been a category reinvention, segment reinventions, or the total department reinvention. We've proven that you can generate a 2 to 3% increase in your overall volume. So the fun part is, what are the best practices? What are the design principles that allow you to move forward? What are some pathways that you can take to reinventing that dairy department? And again, in that spirit of shopping, not searching, we have our first 2 best practices. Because as we have talked to retailers, they will tell you that that average shopper might be spending 20 to 30 minutes in the store, but only about a third of that time is actually shopping. The shopping meaning they're engaged with the product, they're looking at the label, they're making that selection, they're getting new information, they're understanding product benefits. The other 2/3 of that time is spent searching the store. And as we've gotten into this project, one retailer told us, well, my stores are like snowflakes. No two are the same. And we had this preconceived notion, I won't give you the ages of these guys, but we've all been in this business a long time, and you had this almost preconceived notion that the dairy departments in all stores were the same. Well, they're not. We have conducted these audits, and so in some stores, we find that maybe an important department that the shopper looks at as being part of dairy, maybe it's juice, maybe it's cheese, is actually dislocated. It might be in another aisle. Or we find that you have these long runs across the back of the store, so as the shopper goes to shop dairy, they're constantly interrupted. There's the end cap, there's another aisle that diverts them from shopping dairy and causes them to go down another pathway in the store. And therefore, they're not shopping the entire department. And that's what we want them to do. When they leave that department, we want them to have shopped the entire department. So establish a dairy department versus another aisle. So you know distinctly when you enter the dairy department, and you know when you are leaving the dairy department. Again, in the spirit of shopping, not searching, this sounds almost so basic, make the department easier to shop. Well, what do we mean by that? As we've done these shopper intercepts, we did a lot of videotaping work. And watching the shoppers in that aisle area, many times, again, a long, narrow aisle, or it might be an elbow or corner of the store. Think about your high traffic days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's simply not enough space in that area for the shopper to come in, be engaged, spend that 56 seconds in the department shopping. Because it's crowded, there's not enough space, because the call-outs are not there, they fall into that mode of, okay, well, let's see, I was going to grab some milk, I had 2 or 3 other items I normally purchase, let me fight through the crowd, grab it, and go. And we don't want that. We want them spending time in the department to enjoy all of those products and make additional purchases. So when they leave the department, we want them to say, it was easy to find what I needed. The next 2 principles, our best practices, are based around this concept of my store versus your shelves. It's really interesting in talking to retailers, as well as the shopper intercepts and consumer interviews that we have conducted, those shoppers that have that great sense of loyalty to a particular store, they refer to it as my store. So if we conducted that work here in Chicago, they were loyal to an account, they would say it's my Jewel, my Dominic's. Versus other shoppers that don't have that loyalty, it tends, well, you know, I go to that account, it's that feeling of it's your shelves, not my store. So there are 2 opportunities to really build on the emotional connections with the shopper, to get beyond just the price game, to expand the value equation where many times dairy is used simply as that price generator, traffic builder. We can build those emotional connections, and the first way to do it is on health and wellness, leveraging those relationships. Milk itself, as we hear shoppers in our interviews, there's just that overall halo effect that milk in and of itself provides to the entire category. Why not leverage those feelings, those relationships that the consumer has directly with the product, rather than just playing a price game? String cheese, great healthy item for snacks or to send to school. All of the work that's been done in the yogurt category, we can just go across the entire department. There's a real opportunity to add and build value here beyond just price. The second practice, again in the concept of my store versus your shelves, is to use a broader array of methods to personalize the engagement for the shopper. And we've done this two different ways. You can do it with special lifestyle sections, call out of usage occasions throughout the day parts. Some other opportunities that we've seen as we've done test and learns with retailers is using old and new technologies to personalize that shopping trip. David mentioned quick trips. We have stock-up trips. Each shopping trip is different, just as each shopper is different. Leverage those opportunities. What you see on your left is a simple station that some have employed and that we're recommending for dairy departments of the future. That station could double as a manned sampling station. It could be there when it's not manned to either electronically with a kiosk, allow the shopper to get information about products, about categories, recipes. There are a lot of different ways that retailers can incorporate that depending on their go-to-market strategies and their overall platforms in store, just to take dairy, again, high traffic department, all of the shoppers are going there, again, raise that personalization, that emotional engagement with your shoppers. The last two best practices refer to this sense of a sense of delight versus a sense of dread. We all know, folks, maybe you're one of them, and as you talk to shoppers, I don't like going grocery shopping. I mean, we hear that comment a lot. And again, building that emotional connection and making a sense of, gee, I really actually enjoyed shopping on that shopping trip, and I enjoyed shopping the dairy department. There are two different ways to make it easier for the shopper in that section. One is through the navigational devices, where you're calling out individual sections, categories, new product callouts, and there are different ways to create those navigational sections. We know that each retailer has their own decor package. They may have different policies on clean store policies, but we have found that there are some basic pathways that you can take. One is the use of color to segment different departments and categories. Another is signage, be it rail strips, aisle danglers, and the third is shelf architecture itself. Simple bump outs on the dairy case can again highlight a particular section, maybe on the go. The other way to make it easier to shop, and this can be done either within individual categories or across the entire department, are to have theme sections that meet the lifestyle needs, and call out benefits for the shopper. It could be an on-the-go section, snacking section, meal day parts such as breakfast, kids departments. The last best practice, again with this concept of creating a sense of delight versus a sense of dread, is to offer stronger freshness cues. We know in talking to shoppers and the retailers we've worked with that to grow those dollar volumes that they're looking for, to hit the numbers and leverage the opportunity that Paul has outlined, you need to win fresh and you need to win the perimeter. And so again, by elevating dairy within that perimeter environment, you have the opportunity to get those sales increases. And the freshness cues that come, again, as the shopper thinks about milk, it just embodies freshness. So use those freshness cues rather than that white case we saw early on with the operations-driven approach that David showed us. We can raise those emotional equations again and really build that connection with the shopper. So what I'll walk you through is we've developed these 6 best practices. Again, the focus on making this section easy to shop versus searching. It's my store, not your shelves, and a real sense of delight, not a sense of dread. And translating those best practices into some design principles. Again, the first, contemporize, and we've talked about this throughout the entire presentation. Really raising dairy to that same new, modern, personal feel that you get in the produce departments and the other perimeter departments. So contemporize it. Secondly, dimensionalize. Create that 3-dimensional space that allows the shopper to shop the entire dairy department. You know when you've entered the department, you know when you're leaving the department, and you're addressing the lifestyle and usage needs of the shopper. Third, rationalize. Providing clarity and organization using those navigation devices to make it easier for the shopper to find those items that they're looking for, to discover new items, and communicate value and benefits, which translates also to this concept of invigorate. Dairy provides so much of an opportunity in the health and wellness area, in providing a lot of new items that meet today's shoppers' needs, and we simply haven't communicated those at shelf. There really is the opportunity to build the differentiation, to raise the value equation. And when you think about these 4 design principles, only one of them, the rationalize, drills down and focuses so much on that tactical side of the business. The other 3 really give you the opportunity to build those emotional connections and raise the overall value equation. So as we've developed these best practices and design principles, we're now moving forward, and we really want to encourage retailers across the country, especially as they're doing remodels and new builds, to think about this concept of dairy department of the future. We'll take you through a little video here, which again is an animation, but we think it shows the opportunity how to take dairy and raise it to the same level, the same emotional connections, the same value equation that so many have done in the produce department. We're not saying that this is necessarily the exact decor package that you would use, but we want to set it next to produce, again, another department that you have to get right to show you how the dairy department of the future could deliver on these best practices and design principles. So again, as you enter the store, and typically when we enter most supermarkets, that first department that you encounter is the produce department, and it embodies those principles. It's dimensionalized. You can shop the entire department. You know distinctly when you're entering the produce department. There's a lot of communication around the products, and then you know when you're leaving that department. You've had the opportunity to move around and shop the entire department. We want to do the same thing with dairy. You know when you have entered that department, and we really build on the freshness cues and leverage the shopper's emotional connection that they have with milk and dairy-based products, because they really feel that sense of personalization. We've talked about the opportunity, again, to communicate consumer benefits, to have more interaction with the shopper. The education of clerks is very important, so that when they're asked questions, they're able to respond to the shopper's questions. There's the opportunity with appetite appeal. We discussed some of the different navigational devices that you can employ. Again, each retailer obviously will have their own decor package, own go-to-market strategy. Shelf architecture, again, bumping out special sections, and allowing the entire department to be shopped. You can move back and forth across the department, generating related item merchandising ideas. We really feel that this would bring the overall dairy department to that level that you've seen with produce and other fresh perimeter departments.